Welcome to Diaspora, the podcast where we share the remarkable stories of immigrants from the Indian subcontinent. I am your host, Aditya Mehta. Each week, we sit down with individuals who have made the journey and explore their experiences, their challenges, their triumphs, and we delve into their unique perspectives on adapting to a new culture while staying connected to their roots. Today, we're joined by Sonal Bhargav, a biopharmaceutical scientist based in Seattle since 2013. She is originally from a city called Dehra in India and moved to the US, specifically Beaverton, Oregon, when she was 10 years old. Now she is a senior manager at CG Oncology, a clinical stage biotechnology company. So basically, she's smart. I know Sonal and her family through our neighbors, Vaibhav and Gauri, and we quickly became great friends. With Sonal, because we're both highly organized people, and with her husband Viraj, because we both love corny Bollywood movies such as Andaz Apna Apna. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. And with that, let's dive into this week's conversation. Sonal, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, the first thing I want to touch upon, I like to give my guests some context on different cities in India.
Mm-hmm.
So, tell us more about Dehradun. What kind of place is it? What kind of city is it?
Yeah, so Dehradun, if you can imagine, is exactly like Colorado. So I would say Aspen or Boulder. It's a beautiful city with a lot of mountains, a lot of lakes. You know, it's towards the northern part of India.
Yeah.
So the weather is very, very similar to what I would say Seattle, Washington, just a little chillier. As you guys know, the houses in India are made of cement. So, you know, the insulation is not that great. So it is a little colder than what we would say in Seattle. But yeah, it's a beautiful place.
So when I was describing Dehradun to JD, I actually said, and JD's our producer, I actually said I would think of Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
So we think about the same. So were you born there as well or just grew up?
Yeah, no, I was born there. I lived there for the first 10 years of my life with my parents, my younger sister, and then we migrated to the States in 98. So it's been a really, really long time.
What brought about the move?
Yeah, so actually it was my dad's job. So at that time, you know, I was very young, but we didn't have cell phones or,
Sure.
you know, there was no landline. So we didn't even know when he started interviewing for the job, or at least I didn't know. I was too young. And he had his first job in a cafe over Skype.
Wow.
And he heard back and he got a job with Nike in Beaverton. And that's how we all moved here.
Wow. It's hard enough getting a job while you're in India and a job here that requires work authorization, sponsorship. But to do it in the 90s, that's pretty amazing. What kind of job was it?
So he's in IT. So he's,
Okay.
director in Nike in database science. And so, yeah, we've been in Beaverton, or my parents are still in Beaverton, Oregon, and we've been there for over 20 plus years now.
Wow. And how has the town changed while you've been living there?
I think it's exactly like Seattle, Washington. I do think, you know, post-COVID, the town, you know, similar to Seattle, has seen a lot of changes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but for me, it's home.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's exactly the same as it was when I moved in the 90s.
Is there a sort of a healthy competition between Portland and Seattle?
I mean, I think so, but I do think the food in Portland, I'm vegetarian, so I would say the food in Portland is superior level compared to Seattle.
Right. And do your friends back in the Portland area give you crap about, defecting to the other side?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the funny part is a lot of us moved to Seattle, Washington. But the good part is a lot of, you know, my parents' friends and so family friends and, you know, how I became friends with my friends who moved here. The parents all still live in Beaverton. So for all of us, it's a place to come home to during, you know, weekends or any big events. And so I think that part kept us all connected. So most of us actually moved out and don't live in the Portland area, but, you know, it's still home for all of us.
Nice. Did you move during the summer or were you dropped into a new school in the middle of the school
So
year?
we actually moved in November, and I remember it because it was Diwali. And I'm sure a bunch of people know it's sort of the biggest Indian festival.
Yeah.
It's sort of like our New Year's. And so we landed on actually Diwali in November of 1999. And it was very, very crazy. That was the first time I actually had been on a plane.
Wow.
And so I, have very embarrassing stories just going up the elevator and then just, the motion sickness you experience with traveling across 24 hours. And,
Yeah.
we're 11. And so one of our family friends who we just found out that they were also living in Portland through my dad's cousin came and picked us up. And it was crazy. It was Diwali, and they took us to their home, and we sort of celebrated Diwali with them. And yeah, it's a blur, sort of the
Sure.
first few months, but I do remember distinctively the time
Yeah.
just because it was Diwali.
The aviation buff in me would probably have asked you what airline you flew.
I
and
do
what
remember
your,
that, Air France.
and what your layover was and what kind of plane it was, but I'll leave that to avoid boring our listeners. So I guess at least you had a landing spot. It wasn't just, cold into a place where you didn't know anyone. So when my wife Prachi and I moved to Vancouver, we didn't know anyone. And we kind of just made our way to the hotel, and it was, so it's nice to have at least someone who can show you some ropes, and while you get going. And I think it's also a little bit easier when you have a job in hand when you move versus like just burning money for the first few months, right? And did your dad stay at Nike for a long time?
He's still there.
Oh, he's still
and,
there.
Yeah, and
Wow.
he's going to be retiring in a couple of years. So, but still at Nike.
That's amazing. When I used to work in Amazon, if someone's stuck around for 5 years, they're probably more senior than 92, 93%. I think part of it speaks to the work culture of a company, but part of it also speaks to our generation. I would have employees in India who are, I guess, maybe 6 or 8 years younger than me. They will quit when they complete 12 months just because.
Yeah. I think part of it is also sort of the risk you want to take, right? He moved with his entire family.
Sure.
So I think that really played a part in sort of how much risk he wanted to take in a new country where, we had a little bit of family,
Yeah.
you could say, but not really everyone. So to
Yeah.
bring stability into the family and, getting us settled here, my mom wasn't working, he didn't really have the flexibility
Sure.
to have
Yeah.
that option.
Yeah. It's one of those things that you get when you're actually in the position and you
Yes.
can't relate from an outside perspective. So now you're in the new school as soon as you get here, or did you have to wait out? for
No,
a few
so we
months?
actually started school immediately. And so I went in middle school and my sister was in elementary school. So I think maybe we had like a couple of weeks just because of like the documentation and sort of figuring out where the school is and,
Yeah.
the bus route and everything. But yeah, it was immediately we started. And yeah, that was a big shock. The schooling
you-
here is definitely very different.
Did you have school uniforms in India and now you could wear
Yes, I
whatever
did.
you...
Yeah. So I went to a private school in India, which,
Yeah.
uniforms and everything.
Yeah.
And here it was, that was one of the shocks where, oh, you could wear whatever you want.
Yeah. In my school, you were allowed to wear your own clothes only on your birthday. And my birthday is during the summer vacations in India, so I never got to do
Yeah.
it. But I can imagine how that would be. I'm guessing not a lot of South Asians in the school over there.
No, actually, in Oregon at that time, in the 90s, not a lot. Now it's definitely changed and it has grown. I mean, even when I was in high school, it definitely changed at that time. But in middle school, there weren't a lot. And even if there were, I think I was just it was sort of like a out of body experience
Yeah.
where am I, what's going on?
Yeah.
That I don't think I really paid any attention to it. It was just sort of figuring out the schooling system here
Sure.
and the life here. And I definitely think that for me, because of the age that I came, it was a lot difficult and different to adjust versus, my sister who came at a
Younger.
lot younger age.
Sure, that makes sense. We have similar subjects that are taught in the school in India
Yes.
and the US, but the way they're taught is very different.
Hmm.
And even the terminology, the way that the tests are taken. India is very focused on memorizing everything. And how did you find adjusting to that? Was that like coming to an easier system or a harder system?
I believe it was easier. So when it was interesting. We had to take like a test to see sort of where we were in terms of our language
Right.
skills. So both my sister and I were part of the ESL services
Sure.
initially, right? And what we did when we took the test, we both actually ranked higher in sort
Right.
of the grade system than we would have been put in here. So we were asked, my parents were asked, like, hey, do you want to have your kids like skip grades? Like, I was in sixth grade, she can go into eighth grade. My
Oh, wow.
sister came, I think, in first grade, and, she could have gone into third or fourth grade. And, my parents said no. And at that time, I was like, oh, why did you say no? We could have like skipped classes.
Yeah.
And now I realize like the social component of it,
Yes.
is so important. And
Yes.
for us to like transition from another country, I'm glad they had us stay where we did.
Yeah.
So one thing it did do, or it was good, was academically, we were very well advanced. And so we didn't really have a hard time transitioning and adjusting academically.
Yeah.
But I'm glad the social part of it, because we stayed in the class that we were, was
Yeah.
a lot easier to navigate.
I was the youngest in my class from, I think, kindergarten all the way to my MBA. I've always been the youngest in my class. And I think back then my parents didn't, it wasn't like the competitive nature that India has, that like, let's get ahead of it. But they thought it might be a good idea. And so I graduated undergrad before I turned 21. But at the same time, I always felt a little bit less prepared than everyone else. So for my kid, I would definitely make him stay like, 1 year late, even if I could, because you're gonna work your whole life. You're gonna be in the job market your whole life, or in the business your whole life. So take that extra year, have some fun.
Yep.
And like in your situation, get used to all of these things, and it gives you that breathing room to get up to speed, right? There's a book called Outliers, and I recommend everyone with young children to read it. It's by Malcolm Gladwell. It talks about how at that age, a 3-month gap is a lot, and how that can give you advantages, especially in sports, because you're physically bigger even in 3 months. And then from elementary to middle to high school, that advantage just magnifies.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a very interesting read, and that convinced me to not rush my son Arjun into school. So we'll see how that goes. So now you're here and you're in a new environment. Were you able to keep touch with your friends from India?
No. So sad part was, at that time, obviously we didn't have cell phones. There was no social media.
Yeah.
And so I remember my dad helped me create an MSN account at that time, or
Sure.
Hotmail. And so we would send emails. But again, in India, a lot of people at that time didn't have internet connections either.
Yeah.
And so to figure out like how to keep in touch was really, really difficult.
Yeah.
But one good part was, when I did get Facebook when I was in college and came on social media, I was able to find a bunch of friends.
Nice.
So, it's, you see their sort of life now and you see what they've done, but it's
Yeah.
not the same
Yeah,
as
of
it
course.
probably would have been.
I changed schools a lot as a child. So similarly, I found friends from the earlier schools. But I mean, what are you going to talk after a point, right?
Right. Like, you have a huge difference now, right? And like
Yeah.
the gap is there and you are not experiencing the same thing. So,
Yeah.
it's,
And on the note that, I'm guessing like late 90s, early 2000s, internet was literally just coming to India
Yeah.
in a consumer sense.
Yeah.
I remember we had dial-up internet, and my dad had the foresight of blocking adityamehta.com in like 2000. And now there's a person who incidentally I know personally from college. His name is Aditya Mehta. He's a famous snooker player, and he represents India at the snooker for snooker. And he was always complaining that, I can't find this domain name.
Because someone took it.
And then one day he saw my face on a website when he tried to see who bought it. So that was fun. But growing up, we would go to these cyber cafes.
Yep.
And there were these little shops, to give more context, where you have a bunch of computers and you go and pay by the hour, and they have printing services and whatnot. And people would go there and play Counter-Strike, or just browse the internet randomly and explore, because it was like how AI is right now. It was a wide new world that nobody knew anything about. So, okay, so not able to keep in touch with friends. How did you go about deciding what you wanted to be? Because unlike India, there's no science, commerce, arts. There is much more flexibility in that sense. Like, you could be an engineering major, but also take a Greek mythology class, right?
Yes.
So was that too much choice, or did you always know what you wanted to do?
So I think for me, it was different, right? So my parents, when they came here, they didn't really know about sort of the schooling and how the college system was working.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had to get up to speed pretty quickly and learn how to navigate, what majors are there. And, my dad's a computer engineer. My mom has a master's in art. So that was there. But for me, I think the deciding factor was, so my mom got diabetes, pretty for her age, pretty early.
Right.
And at that time, I was like, okay, so you have all these medicines and you have all these diseases coming. I want to be a scientist so I can cure some disease.
Sure.
And so for me, that was it. And I really, really liked science. And, I had a good aptitude in science and a good hold in math. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do bioengineering. And, in the early 2000s, it was a very upcoming major. There wasn't a lot of bioengineers that I knew or even that I'd heard of. And so that's how I ended up picking the major and ended up going to Oregon State to do my undergrad.
Great. So we're going to take a short break here. And when we come back, we are going to talk about, now that you're on the other side as a parent, how are things same and different? And we'll be back in no time.
Hi, I'm comedian Darren Streblow, and each Sunday at 7 a.m., it's comedy to get your morning started right. The Darren Streblow Comedy Show features family-friendly comedy, along with those little bits of encouragement that we all need to get through the week. You'll enjoy stand-up comedy, plus I visit one-on-one with comedians to find out just what makes them tick. Remember, laughter is the best medicine, and we've got your dose. Sundays at 7 a.m., it's the Darren Streblow Comedy Show on Alternative Talk 1150.
Click this link now to review my bank transfer. I didn't make a bank transfer. Ugh, another phishing message. Are you frustrated by these too? So much of our lives are online today. To make sure my information is protected, I checked out CISA's Secure Our World resources. They've got 4 simple ways we can stay safe online. First, learn to recognize and report phishing. Next, create a strong, unique password for each online account, and use a password manager if you can. Then turn on multi-factor authentication for extra security, and you'll receive a code when logging in. And finally, turn on automatic software updates for convenience and safety. Click here to track my delivery. Another phishing message. But now I know how to protect myself from scammers, and you can learn too. Go to CISA at cisa.gov/secure our world for more quick, easy tips to be safer online.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diasporaa, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diasporaa offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diasporaa Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
Real people, real life, real radio. Alternative Talk 1150.
Welcome back. We are talking to Sonal Bhargav, scientist, mother, and a dear friend of mine. So, we talked about your school and your college days and the start of your career. Move ahead a few years. Now you're a mother and you have a 7?
Yes,
7-year-old.
He's going to be very upset if you say 6 because it's his birthday this month and he will be 7. Yes.
So, and your husband Viraj has spent more time in India during his childhood years. So both of you are not at the same point on the assimilation curve, I would suppose, because the longer you stay in India before moving here, the more you retain your Indian maybe accent, your habits, your thought process. Was that ever, led to a difference in opinion on how to raise the child with that balance of the Indian and the American background?
So I think what helped was, Viraj also moved to America when he was 18 for his undergrad.
Right.
And so, I wouldn't say like sort of defining years because obviously, your puberty and your sort of teen years he spent in India, but sort of his defining years where you are sort of forming, formative opinions and stuff was here.
Right.
And so I think one of the things that really helped and sort of had us come to the same sort of wavelength was the fact that his mom was a working mom. And so he had sort of seen that naturally growing up, you know, the importance of work and sort of balancing out the career for both sides of the parents, right?
Sure.
And, you know, growing up and having to come and live an independent life here. And so I think that really helped us come on the same wavelength when it comes to sort of parenting.
Yeah.
And again, you know, I think where the difference lies is he hasn't really gone through schooling here.
Yeah.
So, you know, like the elementary school, middle school,
Right.
and high school. So all of that, it's sort of like he's living that now through our, you know, son who's
Yeah.
going into elementary school. So I
Sure.
think that's where sort of the difference is the understanding of like, oh, what comes next? You know, how do we approach certain
Yeah.
situations?
Yeah.
But, you know, for sort of big decisions and everything, we're pretty much on the same wavelength. And I think part of that definitely is also he grew up in Bombay, in a very metropolitan city, right?
Sure.
He had working parents. He moved here himself when he was young. So I think that definitely
Yeah.
helped a lot.
I think that was another touch point that led to Viraj and me being friends so quickly is that
It's
we're
the Bombay.
Bombay Gujaratis. So I see this with Prachi to some extent. We moved here to Canada together at the same life stage, but I had already spent 4 years in a previous innings, and that was as a college student. And, you know, it could go either ways. Like I could have a much better understanding of the schooling system, or all my benchmarks are that of a student. So it has taken me some time to kind of reset my default and not base it on a college student life in the
Right.
US.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. How has the immigrant child experience changed, in your opinion, from where you were in that position to now when Athar was in that position?
So I don't think he's experiencing sort of the same things that we did, right?
Yeah.
So I would say his experience is very similar to probably my sister, right? So my sister, when she moved here, she was 6. So
Right.
same age as Athar. The good part with Athar, you know, growing up here is that he definitely has a lot more diversity around him, right? And so for him, he doesn't really feel like he's in an area where he's, you know, where am I? What's going on? You know, there's a lot more diversity celebrated, and, you know, he has friends and family who have grown up here. And so he's seeing a lot of those similar things. So I don't think he's experiencing similar things where we were, you know, like my sister and I were first generation immigrants here
Yeah.
who studied here.
Sure.
Athar doesn't really have that. You know,
Yeah.
both of his parents, even like Viraj, for a significant part, has been here now, right? It's been more than 20 years.
Yeah.
And so sort of us raising our child in this sort of generation and area is very different now compared to what my parents probably had to go through. I
Yeah.
think at that time, it was, you know, always a struggle on, okay, how do we assimilate to the culture here and pick up all the good things from living in America, but
Yeah.
also sort of retain our, you know, culture
Yeah.
and background. I think for them, that was always a lot of their concern because, you know,
Yeah.
they heard that, oh, you know, you're going to America, make sure, you know, we talk in Hindi, or, you know, they're able to speak to our grandparents.
Sure.
Athar doesn't really have the same challenges. All of his grandparents, you know, speak in English,
Right.
you know, so he doesn't really have to identify sort of with that culture shock
Yeah.
that we probably had to, or
Right.
our parents had to learn how to navigate.
And even if there is a bit of a culture shock, you have much more resources
Exactly.
available, especially the like internet and a phone to learn pretty much anything that you need to learn about those differences.
I mean, I think that's the challenge now, right? It's like too much of a social media exposure.
Yeah.
And how do you manage that versus, you know, at our generation?
Yeah. Do you feel like, as a general rule, in our generation, the parents are much more hands-on, often too hands-on with kids? Because when I was growing up, kids just grow up. Like, you know, you don't have that kind of micro parenting, and it's good and bad. I'm not going either way. But do you feel that our generation is more involved in
Oh,
that
for
sense?
sure. I think it's pros and cons, right? So I think being more involved, it's definitely great. You're able to be, you know, be part of a lot of things that your kids are doing, right?
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I mean, and I can't speak for everyone, but for me, definitely what I've seen is that I definitely try to like remember sort of challenges that I have. And so I'm overprotective in the sense that, okay, I don't want him to go through the same thing.
Sure.
Right. So I think in that sense, yes, there is a lot of that, like, you know, micro parenting going on where it's like, okay, I went through this. I'm going to make sure, you're sort of in this bubble, so you're not experiencing that.
Yeah.
But, you think about it, and that's not a bad thing. Sort of those
Sure.
challenges made me the person I am today, and I think helped me learn how to face a lot of these challenges, right? But I do the same thing where I'm like, okay, no, I'm going to create this bubble because I don't want you to
Yeah.
get hurt. So
Yeah, that's understandable. I had a question, but I forgot, so I'm going to come back to it at some point. What do you do to keep Atharv in touch with Indian culture in terms of, do you teach him any skills that are, what kids in India would learn, or any activities or any exposure to, be it content, festivals? What are the things you do?
yeah, so I think, like I said, that is just, it's so much prevalent now, different cultures, and he has those resources at school. He meets a lot more people, like at school, for example. They celebrate all different like cultures and festivals. So he celebrates Diwali. He gets to wear his Indian outfits, on like cultural day. So I think it comes a little bit more naturally just because it's already there. You're not being forced to sort of bring out all of that information. I feel for the other part, Viraj still has family back in India. And so having conversations with them and just, celebrating Indian festivals with the friends we've made here, I think helped sort of bring that awareness about what the culture is. I feel like the reality is it's going to be very different, our kids growing up sort of here versus when we grew up. And sort of what I've seen is you just have to like let them assimilate as much as they can without sort of being that overbearing parent on like, no, you have to do this or you have to learn this.
Yeah, our strategy has been to just throw everything at him and see what sticks.
Exactly.
So far, cricket, baseball, ice hockey, ice skating are kind of the things that have stuck the most. And I see sometimes Prachi try a little harder with the Indian habits. So she'll be like, why don't you learn chess? And I'm like, no, let's go watch the baseball game. So we do have a bit of kind of, we're on different planes there, but that's the beauty of it. And I was talking on JD's radio show a few days ago, where the fact that I can talk like college sports or American sports, that's only been an asset in forming relationships quickly with people. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But I do also feel that the way India is going, there's going to be so many opportunities there in the next, 50 years, that you might have people like our kids who are born here actually consider living there for some time for whatever opportunity, because by being of Indian origin, they already have a bit of a head start.
Exactly.
So in that sense, it would be nice for them to know cricket or, understand basic Hindi or Gujarati. But with the languages, do you feel it's really hard after a point to have them stick to or at least be fluent in a language?
I think so. So, as much as we try, so I think Viraj does a better job of teaching him Gujarati.
Yeah.
I personally, and that could be because I've grown up here. I've been here for a really long time.
Yeah.
My first sort of go-to is English, even between my sister and I. So I am fluent in Hindi and I can speak that with my parents. But I think for me, English is very easy now.
Sure.
And so sometimes even I'm like, okay, how do you say this in Hindi for me to explain this to you, or what this word is, right? And so it automatically comes. But I do feel like it is great to learn, different languages, because I think even if he doesn't stick with Hindi or Gujarati, in the future, if he wants to learn Spanish or French, it will be a little easier for him to learn those languages. But again, I think I'm of a believer, if I'm like forcing him to speak a language that predominantly a lot of his friends don't, he's going to see it as a force versus like, no, I should do that because I want to. And so it's sort of finding a balance on like, okay, I want you to learn. So like you said, when you go to India and not everyone can speak in English, you're able to have a basic conversation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't want you to force you to learn this, because the truth is predominantly all of his friends speak in English and their common language is English.
So till my son Arjun was 2 years old, we only spoke to him in Gujarati. He thought I don't speak English. And then we started introducing other languages. It really helps when grandparents are visiting. But as a result, his Gujarati has a Kathiawadi accent, which for those who don't know, it's a part of Gujarat which has a very slang-based Gujarati, and it's almost considered like a blue-collar Gujarati. So he speaks that. and then those pronunciations carry over into English. So he has this weird mix of like all these languages. But I think now he's definitely, his R's are getting softer, and he's not able to pronounce those Gujarati words with the, the offbeat alphabets and pronunciation. So we try. We'll see how long that lasts. Okay, that's great to hear. Do you ever kind of nudge him in different directions as far as careers go? Because that's a big thing in India, is gotta be STEM career, engineer, lawyer, doctor.
No. It changes. Like last year he wanted to be a vet. Then this year he wants to be a police officer. Then, he goes to his dentist. Oh, I'm going to be a dentist. So I think for both Raj and I, the rule is just, study whatever you want to study.
Yeah.
And, just do well.
Do well. Yeah. Do
just
a good job
do well.
at it.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's better to be excellent in a mediocre profession than mediocre in a excellent profession.
Yes. Yeah.
Great. Awesome. So when you have parents who have just moved with their kids, similar age, they don't have the advantage of spending a few years here as growing up. What advice would you give to those parents? Because in Seattle, especially with the huge number of tech workers, we see that a lot, where it's basically people in your life situation with like a 10-year-old kid, but they're coming today instead of in the 90s. What advice do you have to those people?
So I think the biggest thing would be is try to assimilate as quickly as possible and learn about, the different cultures here, go out and talk to people. I think one of the best things that, my parents could do, or even we were sort of forced to do, is start having difficult conversations yourself. I remember like when we moved here, so both my sister and I learned British English, right? So for me, that accent still stuck around for a really long time.
Yeah.
But for my sister, she was so young that it sort of changed very naturally, very quickly. And so it would be the same thing. We would go to the restaurants and, they would be like, no, you have to order. You have to order.
Right.
We're not going to order for you.
Yeah.
Or you have to go talk and have these conversations.
Yeah.
So it was very uncomfortable. And it was the same for my mom, right? Like my mom, even though she spoke in English, she was living in India where she didn't really need to speak English. And so my dad was working. We had to go to the grocery stores. How do you order groceries? How do you get your medicines from the pharmacist, right?
Yeah.
And so forcing to have those uncomfortable conversations, I think really help you gain the confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think sometimes what happens is, and I get it, right? It's very natural and it's very comforting to be around people who speak the same language as you, who are from the same country as you, and, understand really your cultural nuances.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, I think trying to assimilate and, meeting people, which is the great part about living here, from different culture, really force you to come out of your bubble and have those uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
So I think that's the best thing you could do.
Sure.
Is it's uncomfortable, but you have to do it.
I also feel India is a lot more competitive.
Yes.
Given just the sheer number of people and number of opportunities. I feel a lot of the immigrants who move here, they're wired that way.
Yeah.
And it's a hyper competitive kind of state of mind. Do you think that generally hurts or helps their kids when the parents have that mindset?
So I think, so in some ways, it helps, right? So it helps you sort of have that focus. It helps you, maybe get exposure. But I also go through this, and I feel like I get very overwhelmed when I see that hyper competitiveness, right? Because for me, because of the majority of my time, I've grown up here, and my parents really didn't have that. I never grew up so competitive.
Yeah.
And so I'm on the flip side where I see that and I'm like, I don't know how to act. Like, I don't know how to like act around you or sort of like be in this nature, because I feel like I don't want a turf growing up where he feels like he has to do certain things because that's what's expected of him in sort of that South Asian culture bubble, right?
Certain things by certain age. And then when you do this, you move on to the next step.
Right. And so he has to sort of figure out his own life pathways. And I think what we could do is sort of guide him. So I think in that sense, maybe that will help, right? You can help guide him in a certain way.
We were at a open house in my son's school, and they had these little booths with all these, activity providers, like the soccer guys. And so one of them had this big board saying, kids learn motor skills in a non-competitive environment. And I heard one of the other parents, I'm assuming she was Indian, but South Asian for sure. She was like, non-competitive, what's the point? And I get it, like, that you're wired that way, but, kids can learn even if it's not competitive. It doesn't always have to be. And Arjun's in a very, very competitive state right now.
Yes.
So everything is that. So I'm hoping that kind of balances and evens out after some point. On that note, we're going to take a short break. And when we come back, we'll talk about Sonal's current role, her career, and her plans for the future, and her advice to other new immigrants. We'll continue that topic as well. Right back.
This is Martha Norwalk. Every Sunday morning, beginning at 9 a.m., thanks in part to the Ananda Institute of Living Yoga, we cover the world of animals. This week, March 30th, it's an encore presentation. Join us to hear our last healing show with Dr. Nils Rasmussen and Sister Linda Rasmussen. Together, they took phone calls and helped listeners and their animal friends with behavior training and healing issues, and you can receive a surrogate healing just by following Linda's instructions. Martha Norwalk's Animal World, Sunday morning, 9 a.m. to noon, right here on Alternative Talk, AM 1150.
Over the years, you've brought them into your home. You were prescribed opioids after the C-section, when Dad injured his back, when your basketball star tore his ACL. Opioids helped with the pain, and you held on to them just in case. But did you know holding on to unused opioids puts your family at risk? Opioids are powerful pain-reducing prescription medicines, but most people who are prescribed opioids don't finish their prescriptions. So millions of unused opioids are sitting in homes across the country. And tragically, more than 100 Americans die every day from overdoses involving opioids. What can you do to protect your family? Remove the risk of unused opioids from your home. Pills, patches, or syrups in drawers, purses, and cabinets, anywhere they might be hiding. To find out how to dispose of them properly, visit www.fda.gov/drug disposal.
Are you ready to discover remarkable stories of resilience and cultural connection? This is Diasporaa, a show sharing the journeys of first-generation immigrants from the Indian subcontinent now building their lives in North America. Inspiring, insightful, and always engaging, Diasporaa offers a unique perspective on the immigrant experience. Join me, Aditya Mehta, my guests, on the Diaspora Show every Wednesday at 2 p.m. right here on KKNW.
There's a reason they invented the internet. It's called 1150kknw.com.
Welcome back. We're talking to Sonal Bhargav, our guest for today. So we were talking about advice for new immigrants. If you came today, would you do anything differently than what your parents did back then?
I don't think so. I think, as challenging, okay, I'll take that back. Maybe I would have come to a place which had a little bit more Southeast Asian. But, at that time, obviously, how would you know that?
Yeah.
And again, I think part of that would have been just to sort of have that ease, particularly for ourselves. And again, that's coming in, in your late 30s. I do definitely think that would have been a little easier.
Sure.
But would I change sort of knowing what they had done? Probably not.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. If a new immigrant comes here and they long for, the familiarity, and they live in a neighborhood which is other people just like them. With India, I feel like, because it's such a diverse country, if there are 10 Indians in a university, everybody hangs out together. But like I went to UT Austin and there were maybe 2,500 Indians. The Bombay folks hang out separately, and the Delhi folks hang out separately. So when someone comes in and goes to this neighborhood where everyone's like them, you get into a comfort zone really quick. So how do you kind of, I'm not going to say break out of it because it's not like you're trapped, but how do you keep your mind open and keep exposing yourself to other types of cultures and other types of people? For a child in the school, it's easy. For, if for some workplaces, it's easy. But other than that, how would someone who's not able to find those opportunities to network and meet with other people, what advice do you give them on how to do that?
So I think it's definitely become a little easier now, right? Like I said, there's so much social media presence, and, people like us who've come here earlier have created sort of these platforms for Southeast Asian or, other,
Yeah.
immigrants coming from other culture where they're able to meet people, right? There's a lot of meetups. My parents necessarily didn't have that. So a lot of that at least for my dad, came from his workplace,
Yeah.
right? And, my mom, just sort of taking us to activities, she was able to meet people. And yet, they also were very lucky to sort of find, their friend circle who are predominantly Asian. But I think what I saw them do is they had a very open mind and they exposed us to as much as they can.
Right.
So it sort of created that comfort zone for us to have those opportunities for conversations.
Sure.
And I think also coming in to a state where we didn't really have a lot of Southeast Asians definitely pushed us to have that.
Yeah.
But I think now we're pretty lucky that we have resources and opportunities.
Sure.
So I think it's all up to you. It's definitely a shock. It's definitely a challenge. But even in India now, due to like a lot of multinational companies, a lot of, immigrants from US moving there,
Yeah.
people have that exposure.
Yeah.
So I really, really think it's, up to an individual. How comfortable are they on sort of expanding,
Yeah.
And where they are coming. Again, if there's not a lot of Southeast Asians in a certain place, that could definitely be difficult,
Yeah.
and that's understandable.
That makes sense.
But yeah.
As far as your work goes, tell us a bit more about what you do.
Yeah. So my background is bioengineering. So I did my undergrad from Oregon State in BioE, and then I did my master's in chemical engineering from UC Irvine. So I've been in the pharma industry for a really long time. I came to Seattle actually to work for Amgen. And then I ended up at CGen. So my background is in oncology drugs. So I've worked there for, over 12 years now.
So for the layperson, do you help develop the drugs?
Yeah, so I'm in sort of the development phase. So I do formulation. And then I actually was working in Vancouver
I remember
for
that.
a year and a half as part of the manufacturing sites. So sort of working with our external partners who manufacture the drugs. So.
Okay. Do you like it and do you plan to continue doing that?
Yeah, I really, really love it. I think the best part is sort of just being in the research field. I used to work in the lab. I moved out. And so now my work is fully remote and I get to travel for work. But yeah, I plan to continue doing this. I do think, though, eventually I do want to move into sort of focusing more on STEM research, particularly for women, minority women, and just women in general. So I try to do a lot of volunteering, helping kids with science fair or generally finding women, and sort of mentoring them
Yeah.
to get into science.
I'm going to throw like a curveball here. What was your first impression of me when you met me?
First impression of you, huh?
And these are early episodes, so I'm trying to get my listeners to know
I'm
me a
trying to
little bit
think,
as
when
well.
did we first meet? It has to be
It was at
actually,
the-
okay, so I first met Prachi at, Gauri's house, and it was for a girls' sleepover. And she was like, oh, yeah, Aditya, you'll love meeting Aditya. He's like Viraj. He's going to love Viraj, and then I think we met outside or you guys came
I think it was
over.
like a restaurant in Bellevue.
Restaurant in
downtown,
Bellevue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the first impression, I turned to Viraj and I was like, oh, you're going to really like this guy because your sense of humor,
Yeah.
I've gotten used to Viraj's, sarcastic sort
Yeah.
of all the annoying joke, sense of
Yeah.
humor. And I'm like, oh, this guy's just like you. You're going to
Yeah.
love him. So
Yeah, that sense of humor doesn't work as well in India, especially the dry sense
Yes.
of humor. So I'm glad it was a
But-
positive.
Yes,
for-
but for us, I think it was definitely the connect on sort of our hyper-focused, goal-oriented organization
Yes,
that we
yeah.
have.
yeah, and that was going to be my next question. That as a fellow highly organized person, what is one hack you use in your life which only other organized people will appreciate and probably drives everyone around you crazy?
Okay, I don't know if it drives people crazy because Virat tends to ignore my hyper-focused organizational skill, but I have a calendar where it's like color-coded with
Yeah.
everyone's activities.
Yeah.
And I think that's the only thing that works for me. Like I'm sure you understand as parents and
There's
you have
no
your
other
own
way
like
to do it.
Exactly. And so just, having everyone's activities or appointments and it's also like a sanity check for me when I am planning like, months down the future.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, what do we have going on that day?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it surprises people when someone's like, hey, when did we meet last? And I'll just like search it and be like, yeah, it was 28th January and we did this. And I remember it took me 45 minutes to get there. And they're like, why do you have all this recorded? And I said, that's just how I am.
Yeah.
But does it also come with a need to do continuous process improvement? Because I do that a lot. So for example, if I'm organized and all my jackets are in the closet
Yes.
are by person, mine are also from light to heavy. But then I said, when I pull the jacket, the hanger falls off. So I tried to turn it around on the other side. It didn't fall off. So I told Prachi, we have a process change in the house. Now we're going to hang hangers this way. And please don't mess with the organization. And she's like, who even thinks about stuff like this? And so it drives her crazy.
So I think for me, I am very much like that with my closet. Like it's like color coordinated, like if it's my side of the closet, then the hangers have to be similar color.
Yeah.
It's the same. I could do it for others, but I could see, right? Like it's finding a balance now on, okay, what works for me or what can I let go? Because I know other people in the family, it's going to drive them crazy to do that.
Are the currency notes in your wallet organized by denomination?
So I actually do not carry any notes.
Okay.
Surprising. So it's all cards.
Mine are in denomination and often also separate by currency because I always have Canadian dollars.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes random Indian rupees. So
Those go in others' piggy bank.
sure. I should start doing that. Okay. I think I'm actually out of questions. So let's move on to our weekly segment. Every week we do some lighthearted segments where we ask our guests some questions about things related to being from our part of the world. So why don't we spin that wheel and see what we land on? Lost in translation. So, Sonal, do you have any funny instances or mix-ups that happened with you due to differences in accent or what things are called or just differences in culture?
Yeah. So I remember in middle school, and I remember this like very well. It was, I think, my second day. And as you know, in India, when you have to address your teacher, you say ma'am or sir.
Yeah.
Here it's usually Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, right? But you get up and you raise your hand.
Yeah.
And so I had a question and I got up and I raised my hand and everyone was like, what are you doing? So it's stuff like that,
Yeah.
That are like calling markers here. Like in India, we call them sketch pens.
pen. Yeah.
Erasers were known as rubbers, right?
Yeah.
And so I had a lot of these instances where I would say something and then everyone would be like, wait, what are you saying?
Yeah.
Right? Or like standing up and just learning sort of, it's just different. It's not like British English anymore. So
Yeah, I can see that. When I was, and actually the teacher part, India is a high power distance society, being a high context culture. I don't think I'm still rid of that power distance concept. When I was in Amazon, I would have supervisors who were younger than me, but I would always call them aap instead of tu, which is the respectful version of the you word in Hindi versus the peer version. I just can't get over it. And even though those bosses are also Indian, they would say, like, it's not necessary. You don't have to do that. But I physically can't stop doing it.
Yeah. I think for me, I never had that. Maybe because I came here
Younger,
at 10.
yeah.
So it was a lot more of certain, words versus sort of that like addressing someone, elder than you. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I think we have time for one more. So why don't we spin that wheel again? Okay, this is a new one that we started this week, which is called Ma Ka Khana, which means mother's food. Do you have any favorite comfort foods that remind you of home, or you always have when you go home, be it to Portland or to India?
So I wouldn't say India so much now, but I definitely, going to Portland, even now at this age, I tell my mom, I'm going to tell you all the list and you have to make this food.
Yeah.
And one of those things is pav bhaji.
Of course.
And so I know people you probably won't agree with me, but I went to India the first, after marriage, we've gone to Bombay. That was my
Yeah.
first time. And I had the pav bhaji.
Yeah.
And, Viraj took me. He's like, oh, this is the best place in Bombay. And I was like, no, this does not taste like my mom.
Yeah.
And so I'm very particular. Like pav bhaji for me is like only my mom's like handmade pav bhaji.
I
I
think-
cannot.
For Bombay people, pav bhaji is almost sacred.
Yes.
It's a dish which has bread, almost like dining roll type bread, and it's a mashup of a bunch of different veggies and a bunch of different masalas and spices. But it tastes like heaven. And I want to know where he took you and what he's claimed to be the best one, because I have very strong opinions about it in Bombay.
I mean, even now
especially.
when he makes it, I always tell him it's not like
Yeah.
my mom.
we all have our like hole in the wall pav bhaji
Yes.
places, and everybody swears by them. Or for like other stuff like dosas. That's, I think, the longest standing dispute Prachi and I have in our 13 years of marriage is which dosa is better. That's literally, no one will cede any ground to that. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you for listening to Diaspora. We hope you enjoyed hearing Sonal's interesting and exciting story. Remember to check out our show notes for links and more information about the topics. And I'm going to link to pav bhaji as well that we discussed in today's episode. You can find Diaspora on all major podcast platforms and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. If you like this episode, do consider following us on Instagram or leaving us a 5-star review. Diaspora is part of the Staying Power network of shows and podcasts, all of which are dedicated to inspiring listeners to build lives of meaning, connection, and value. You can find the Staying Power network of shows wherever you get your podcasts. We will be back next week with another interesting story from the South Asian diaspora. Until then, take care and stay curious. Sonal, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.